So today we are with Martine Miller, our professor, that we have this great opportunity this week to learn with her about conflict analysis. And Martine Miller is a mediator and also a conflict transformation specialist for over 20 years. And today, thank you, Martine.
My pleasure.
So I want to ask you, why are you so passionate about the work that you are doing?
I think it's a big question, but I think mainly to answer that, it's something that I've always had a passion to do ever since I was a young person. I was eager to learn about different places and different cultures and different languages. And I just had amazing opportunities over time to be able to meet different people from different locations and always being really passionate about how do we provide a support to each other because we have one common humanity, and to make sure that we show that care and respect to each other, that's important. And I think that's one thing that we do consistently, or try to do consistently throughout our work. So it's just an inherent passion that I've maintained. I started this work, actually started with an international theater. So I did musicals, and that was one way to be able to explore the world in some respects. So we traveled around the United States, Canada, and Europe.
Oh, wow.
And while I was in Europe, I would take 2 days off a month from our theater and volunteer in different centers. And at that time, I had the chance to volunteer in a refugee center for refugees coming from the Balkans War. And when I had that opportunity, it really triggered in me the essence of this work and where I wanted to spend my life. And after that, I finished my contract and I moved to work on the Israel-Palestine borders and work with young people on those borders. And then I went to Angola during the war and worked with internally displaced populations and child soldiers. And it just kind of advanced from there. So I think it was always an inherent passion to be able to work on this field and to really provide support to people that need it at the time and vice versa. So I think just inherent.
Wow, this is amazing. I never heard about it. So when you have identity conflicts, how do you promote social inherence?
So one thing to know about identity conflict is usually conflict, when you look at conflict, you're looking at like root causes of conflict, and many times root causes of conflict are not about identities, they're about resource access or power access. And so what the tendency is that you look at a conflict and you think it might be about identities, but it's actually about something underneath it. So the first thing to do is always to understand the root cause of where that conflict is coming from. And oftentimes identities are used to overlap that resource-based conflict, to protract it, to make it longer term, and to make it more complicated to resolve. And it's done a lot by elite and power structures to be able to secure the resources that they need. So identities are actually really used rather than the root cause of conflict. So I think identities around ethnicities, religion, gender, cultural dynamics are all those identities that are used to deepen and protract usually a resource-based conflict. And so one of the things to do that we've worked on a lot is, particularly if it's a religious ethnic identity conflict, what I call conflict fault line. I work a lot with religious and traditional actors where what we do is come together and do an analysis of the situation together, do capacity building on the situation, and then identify means of intervention. So for Southeast Asia, we've worked a lot with imams, Buddhist clergy, Christian actors, Hindu, animist actors, in identifying those conflicts and then designing those actions. One action for Myanmar, for instance, was bringing interfaith councils together to do early warning and response mechanisms. So when you get a lot of rumors in the community about a religious person committing a crime or a person of a certain ethnicity committing a crime or an issue, what the religious actors would then do is they would go around and check out the rumor and investigate the rumor, and then they would go to their constituencies and talk to them about it and de-escalate the rumor, because many times there might be some minor truth to the rumor, but it's not because somebody has a certain religion or they have a certain ethnic background. It's just the reality of something that happened. and so then they reduce the tensions in their community. So that's one of the things that we set up is that early warning and response mechanism that's worked quite successfully in the Myanmar case. Other times for that response mechanism, Buddhist clergy, when there was an escalation of violence, would go to certain places and try to escort people out so they were protected, because people won't attack Buddhist clergy in their space. So those would be times that were really successful, and you can see that publicized in the media online. The challenge, though, is usually those cases aren't brought up in the mainstream media, but they're there, and so we need to find ways of amplifying them to get at the root cause of where these conflicts are, and that they're not about identities, but they're around resources.
Yeah. And so how can you address positive peace? Or could you explain about positive peace?
Yeah. So what positive peace is positive peace is when you have identities, structures, social patterns that are positive in regards to how people relate to each other and social cohesion in communities. And I'm going to contrast that with negative peace. Negative peace is usually there's conflict under the surface, but there's structural patterns of violence. Negative peace being that there's not overt violence at the moment, but the structures are set up that are violent. So, for instance, when you have a judicial system that targets one population, like political opposition, or a group of different ethnicity, or a gender, or a religious group, when the judiciary targets them for specific reasons because of their identity, will be a negative conflict. When you have positive conflict, or a positive peace, is when you have those structures that are set in place for equal application across the spectrum of society. So an example would be a judiciary where you have a constitution that says everyone has equal rights. The judiciary, the legal structure, makes sure that those equal rights are shown in the legal system, in the rule of law system. So no one's targeted for political opinion, no one's targeted for their ethnicity, their gender, their beliefs in any way. And so that's more of a positive peace structure. Negative peace example would be Northern Ireland and Bosnia. Positive peace example would be, I constantly bring up Iceland, New Zealand, the Scandinavian Nordic countries, where everything is much more equal across society.
And how can you address stereotypes and bias around identities? Is it possible?
I think one way of doing that is to recognize we all come in with stereotypes and bias. Every one of us.
Yes.
So when we're walking down the street as a woman, what do we automatically stereotype if we have a male colleague walking in our direction at night? We automatically have a stereotype and bias of who that person might be and how they might behave. I don't think you can ever get away from that. But I think it's always checking within yourself those stereotypes and biases. I think one first step is when in our class we talked about our own personal identities and that we have fluid identities, and to consistently pay attention to how we feel about our own identities in any given space. So you might feel different about your identity in Thailand than you feel different about your identity in Brazil. Like there might be aspects of your identity that are amplified here that wouldn't be amplified in Brazil, or it might other aspects when you go to Indonesia that your identity will be amplified in comparison. So I think being consistently aware of how we relate ourselves and be empathetic to others and understanding that they're not framed by one identity. So I think that's important to start off with. The other thing is when you're doing an analysis directly, is constantly triangulating your information with others. So when you're going out to do an analysis, you might have your own analysis, but then you want to check in with your colleague, like what is their analysis, and another person, what is their analysis, and definitely get people from different types of perspectives, so that you can triangulate that to get a more unbiased analysis of something. But I don't think you can always get rid of bias. Everyone brings in a perception and a bias.
Yeah.
But it's being empathetic to understanding that who we are ourselves and how we do that ourselves, and constantly checking ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Martine.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So thank you.